We are in the midst of a practical discussion of the relationship between soul and nature, in which Sri Aurobindo describes how that relationship can change and what are the different statuses of relationship. We saw already that our individual soul feels itself somehow free, and yet nature predominates and even tends to overwhelm and define us. But this is only the lower relationship. There is a higher relationship in spirit. When the soul moves out of this formation of mind, life and body and ascends to pure spirit, it finds it is free and nature is its power and its energy which expresses it rather than dominates or forms it. This movement of ascent from the lower relationship to the higher, Sri Aurobindo describes not only at an individual level, where we experience what happens to our own mind, our own life energies and body as we ascend in consciousness. But also the same movement extends beyond our limited personal nature into our immediate environment, and accordingly as our consciousness becomes wider and more universal, it also extends itself into a cosmic relationship with cosmic nature. So this transition is to be explored first at an individual personal level, perhaps in some limited way between we as a conscious observer and some part of our nature, perhaps the mind, perhaps the emotions, perhaps some part or functions of the body, and then increasingly to extend this into the whole of our nature. And it would lead to a practical status of self-mastery. And then as the consciousness further widens and universalizes, it will also extend to a mastery of your immediate circumstances and eventually to all circumstances as a conscious center of the divine working in the universe. Now this graded extension from a narrow, limited personal mastery to an entire universal mastery is taking place simultaneously as our consciousness ascends the levels and at each step reorients, re-establishes its relationship with nature. Sri Aurobindo describes the different relationships drawing from the text of the Bhagavad Gita, first as witness, then upholder, source of the sanction, knower, Lord, and enjoyer. And these 6 relationships again can be experienced at each of these limited extents, perhaps starting with our relationship with our mind, our thoughts, maybe extending to our emotions, extending to our body. And each of these 6 may be developed at different levels, so to say, in different parts of our personal nature and eventually extending to wider spaces. But these 6 also can be experienced on different levels of consciousness as we ascend. Although, as we saw last time, there is a natural development in the unfolding of the 6 as we rise in consciousness. Now I'm deliberately describing this as something, as a multifaceted development, because in practice it is so. For example, in relation to our body and the body instincts, we may still hold a poise, much more of witness, not really experiencing the sense of upholder or source of sanction or lordship. Meanwhile, in our emotions, we may find not only we were witness, but we are upholding and we can actually modify the sanction. And meanwhile, in the thoughts, we may even acquire status of knowership and even partly of lordship, where we can wield the thoughts. So on each of these levels, we may have a different level of development. On each of them, there may be a different degree of expansion beyond the narrow personality. For example, a person who is in a space of collective work with an authority, in the position of, let's say, a leader, or as a group leader, or as the person who decides what happens, directs the project. In such a position, he may already be exercising the aspect of lordship, but partially, and only in certain aspects of thought or emotion, or just the energy which he wields. And you will see this, for example, when the authority walks into the room, the whole team, which was pretty much diverse and distracted and spread out, fragmented, suddenly senses the boss is coming, and they tighten up, they get focused, and they get realigned. May not be conscious at all, but just the fact that this person is in a relationship of authority, and people have accepted that relationship, and the energy he brings into the group is one of clarity and holding, directing. Without saying a word, by the mere presence, there is an exercise of the relationship of lordship in the environment in a very limited space. At the same time as he exercises this relationship of lordship, his child may come to visit him in the workplace. And there, suddenly the child starts dominating. The child says, "I want my ice cream." And perhaps the parent has to say, all right, I'm no more lord here. I am the servant. I have to please my child. So you have multiple relationships in multiple spaces, in different levels of consciousness, to different extensions beyond your individual development. And so the text which we are reading now, Sri Aurobindo describes in its most essential vocabulary, soul and nature, without specifying which of these levels, without specifying the extent of the action, without specifying the complex mixture of these different levels which may be simultaneously working different ways. The text therefore appears a little abstract because he's always saying soul does this, nature does that. But if we keep this larger context in mind, we will realize that what he describes is at a level which is so essential. It operates in everything we do at all levels of our consciousness, but primarily it is of the status of the witnessing poise within, in relation to the activity and the energy which it supports or leads within us and extending beyond. So here he is describing now the 6 relationships, of which we had already begun to read and study the first 3. But quickly to review so that we set the base as we go deeper into it, Sri Aurobindo describes these 6, and then he says, Prakriti, that is the energy, executes, it is the active principle, and must have an operation corresponding to the attitude of the Purusha. And here's another insight which he does not elaborate upon, but the implication must be explored as we study the text. For each poise that we have towards our nature, witness, upholder, source of sanction, knower, lord, enjoyer, there is also an equivalent response in the relationship of our nature. So when he describes, we take the poise of pure witness, Sakshi, the soul looks at the action of nature as a thing from which it stands apart. It watches but does not itself participate. It's a quietistic poise, as if of withdrawal. And to this, he gives three characteristics, a tamasic, rajasic, and a sattvic poise of the witness. In all of these, the common element is, this is Prakriti working in the life, mind and body. It is not me, it is not even mine. And one takes the position of becoming purely in a status of awareness. Now, this poise of Sakshi, most people tend to see it only or experience it only partially. Because I become quiet and so I am now witness. No, that's not enough. One has to go as deep as one can to that poise to get to its most essential character. So earlier in a different passage, he has described how we can disengage from the body. I have a body, but I am not body. Even the body is not mine. And we separate. And generally it is a part of the mind which separates. Similarly with the emotions. There are emotions, they are not mine, they are not me. You separate. And then the thoughts. There are thoughts happening, but they are not mine, they are not me, and you separate. Who's conscious that the thoughts are happening? It's a center in the mind. It's the Purusha status in the mental consciousness, Manomaya of the nature of mind, Purusha. That's the technical term for it. But even there you will find you can actually separate even further from this poise. And this must be done to get to the pure station of the witness. You will notice thoughts come, thoughts go. You are observing the thoughts, but even the sense of I am observing should not be there. You must disengage until it reaches a state where thoughts are happening, things are going. I am not doing anything, not even observing. There's a pure center, a very relaxed poise of awareness that is I, and then everything else is just happening. And when this is sufficiently stabilized, you will actually find you are in a conversation. The conversation is happening. You are not conversing. You are not speaking. You are only aware that this speech is happening, and it almost seems a mechanical thing. Your entire mind function, emotion function, body function seems almost like a programming, almost like a robot. Maybe it's been trained since childhood to behave polite and refined, cultured, but it's just a robot at the end of the day. It's just happening. I actually don't have any sense that I am speaking or choosing. And we must take it all the way to this center to complete this status of the Sakshi witness. In between, as we lead to this completion, we may have three statuses or three variations of this relationship. The tamasic is one of renunciation. I don't participate, I don't care. The rajasic, we saw, has an element of disgust or aversion. This nature, this tendency of my personality to get upset, for my mind to be always agitated. I am disgusted, I refuse to, I back out, I disengage. And then the more sattvic, which is a superior way, with the luminous intelligence of the soul's separateness and the peace and joy of aloofness and repose. And you say to yourself, oh, it is so much nicer to be aloof and free from all this, and I am enjoying this state of freedom. But there is a status even above. This is what Sri Aurobindo advises as in the framework of the integral yoga. And he says, but also it may be attended by an equal and impersonal delight as of a spectator at a show, joyous but unattached, and ready to rise up at any moment and as joyfully depart. This poise of equality is the foundation that Sri Aurobindo recommends. You see, for the purpose of the description, Sri Aurobindo has to articulate all the possible relationships, because according to our nature, according to our starting point, we will experience them. And in mapping the relationships, we understand where that kind of experience lies in the larger picture. We may even begin with something which is semi-tamasic, mixed rajasic, a little bit of the sattvic, but we must move towards this perfect equality. All of the other types of relationships are useful as a starting point. A deep shock of life hits you. Something happens which shocks you and makes you feel a strong withdrawal. The ascetic tendency comes forward. I am fed up with this life. I have had enough of this. And useful as a first step. But you cannot stay stuck with it. At best you may use it as a starting point, but then disengage to bring this equality. Or you may start with a more mental appreciation, which is typical of the thinking types, who will start by saying, yes, but I want to be free of this clutter of my mind. And so you start with a sattvic, luminous intelligence, separating, centering itself in order to find a center of peace. But that's not enough. You must bring it to the poise of equality. We have seen before, in the framework of the integral yoga itself, the first base is set by a process of purification, and upon that the foundation of everything else is equality. And so this is the poise that he points to, and he describes it in this way, that there is an equal and impersonal delight as of a spectator at a show. Now the show may be tragic, it's a tragedy, but still the spectator is delighting in the tragedy. Wow, it is so well done, it is so interesting. I am crying, but I am enjoying the experience of crying in a sense, as something so beautifully, finely formulated by the director or the actors of the play. And so there is a separation, and in the sense of in the state of equality, a kind of an underlying impersonal delight, joyous but unattached. And the reference of whether you're attached is ready to rise up at any moment and as joyfully depart. You will experience this times, not that you choose to depart, but the convenience given to you is made to depart. So you're given an experience which is enjoyable, and then it is withdrawn from you for reasons which are not in your control. And to be able to enjoy both the coming as well as the going equally would be the test of whether this equality has been sufficiently established. But we have to work at it. And it will start by working on certain areas where it is most easy. In relationship to your work, in relationship to certain people in your life, in relationship to life itself in a very general way. And one begins to cultivate on these levels. And then the cultivation extends. Suddenly in your life pops up a violent, disturbing challenge. And now you're forced to stabilize the poise of equality and strengthen its base, deepen it, so that in spite of this challenge, I can still maintain the poise of equality. And we understand that the moment you begin this process with this intention, life will help you. Not only it will help you by giving you supporting experiences, it will also help you by giving precisely those challenging experiences where now you're forced to take the whole thing one notch up and one notch up. This poise will become complete at its highest. He says the attitude of the witness at its highest is the absolute of unattachment and freedom from affection by the phenomena of the cosmic existence. That's when it is the highest. What you have now first set in your relationship with your mind, with your emotions, with your body, with your general personality, with your immediate environment, with your relationship with people, work, life, now extends to everything in the cosmos equally. And then we can say this is complete. The next relationship builds on this in a sense. The more complete the equality is, the witness poise in equality is established, the easier the other statuses can be and more complete they can be. Of course, they may go on parallelly, but to the extent that the equality is still not stable, the witness poise is still not complete, those other experiences also will be partial and subject to disbalance. I have in my practical space of work where I am responsible, I am the boss or the leader of the team, I have a sense of authority or the relationship of the lordship because I lead the group, etc. But the moment there is a revolt in my team, I lose my balance. And my lordship is to that extent compromised or even broken, shattered. But if the poise of equality has been established, then that lordship would be able to manage the revolt and the difficulties which come with it more easily. So this is something to be worked upon, and using the impersonal equality as the base on which it's completed and established. So the next relationship comes now. As the pure witness, the soul refuses the function of upholder or sustainer of nature. And it's a very beautiful insight he gives, that in the very act of saying I am a witness, you have taken a relationship of refusal. Refusal to recognize that in fact you decide, you support what is happening in your nature. When my thoughts are agitated, when my emotions are reactive or unstable, it's because somewhere in my relationship with my energies, with my mind, with my emotions, I have set up a certain relationship that allows it to happen. I can shift that relationship internally and this thing will change. So I'm actually upholding what happens within me without realizing it. But I can refuse to be the upholder, and that's when I take the poise of pure witness. So it's a refusal. And the soul equally can choose now to accept the relationship of upholding and say, well, my poise, my attitude towards my thoughts and emotions actually changed their direction. And now I take responsibility for what happens in my thoughts or in my emotions. And so there will be a shift in the whole response of nature towards you. So with each of these shifts in your consciousness, the relationship with nature changes, and your energy, functions differently according to that relationship. We have read this already last time, but quickly to summarize, in this poise where you are the upholder, you do not necessarily have to say, I am doing. So he says, the upholder, bharta, is another. There's something else at first, which seems, when you're in witness first, the upholder is something else. And later you take on that responsibility of the upholder. So as a pure witness, something is upholding the movement of the energy. Something makes my process of personality work, God or force or Maya, but not me, not soul, which is only accepting the reflection of what's happening. It may say at best, this is imposed on me, but really external to me. But the upholder's position is, all this is in me and maintained by me, an activity of my being. And the logic for this position, Sri Aurobindo says, is obvious. Unless you accept there is a fundamental split in a reality, these two have to be connected. And what is the nature of the connection? He says the soul is the upholder also. It supports in its being the energy which unrolls the spectacle of the cosmos and which conducts its energies. So there is an essential energy which is supported by the soul. When the soul says, what a beautiful spectacle, it's as if somewhere within we have taken a position of accepting to allow the spectacle to continue, to be a participant, not as an active participant, but simply even to observe and enjoy it. If we take an analogy here, the person who's watching this play as a pure witness. It's complex, it's interesting, but he looks at his watch and says, all right, I have to now go to my child's school program. So it's a wonderful play, but I have to leave. And without feeling any loss, because of his equality, impersonality, he leaves this play, goes to the next play where his child is playing. And interestingly there, the relationship is a little different. The child looks for the parent. Where's my mom? Where's my dad? And immediately he feels proud and makes a special effort to do more. Now you notice, the parent may not have done anything, but the fact of the parent being there is creating a response in the child which reflects the state of the parent. And as the play is going on, the child looks furtively at the parent. Oh, they're smiling. I'm doing so well. He feels good. Oh, my parents are frowning. Oh, they're distracted. Oh, they went away. What happened? And he loses interest. The state of consciousness of the witness is actually changing the nature of the play. Unknowingly, we are in the very act of being witness also indirectly supporting the character of the play. And so he says, the soul is the upholder also. It supports in its being the energy which unrolls the spectacle of the cosmos and which conducts its energies. So somewhere at an essential level, if you were not there or if you had no interest, it would take on a different character. When the Purusha accepts this upholding, it may still do it passively and without attachment. So initially, remember, the poise of witness is refusing to be upholder. Now you say, well, all right, the fact is, it makes a difference. And I accept that I am an upholder. But the first level of upholder is very close to the witness, but it is passive. It may do it still passively and without attachment, feeling that it contributes the energy, but not that it controls and determines it. So the parent says, my child is happy or unhappy depending on my presence. So yes, I'm contributing the energy, but I'm not controlling what he does. He's still doing his role as decided by whatever the play director and writer of the script. I just happen to be giving support indirectly. And so the passivity of the relationship is there. And you can see this poise is a very slight shift from the poise of the witness. The witness said, I am not all this and I have nothing to do with it, it's not mine. And from the slight shift it says, well, at the end of the day, my position does make a difference. My presence supports what's happening. But I still remain passive. It contributes the energy, but not that it controls and determines it. The control is another, God or force or the very nature of Maya. That's how the play was designed. That's how the physicist, scientist will say, that's the nature of reality. That's how physical energy works. Those are the laws. The soul only upholds indifferently so long as it must. So long perhaps as the force of its past sanction and interest in the energy continues and refuses to be exhausted. And this is the sense at least. The fact that I have taken birth. Naturally this personality will unfold. The circumstances of my life will happen. I didn't really choose them or direct them. It goes on. Or the parent says, well, the fact that I gave birth to a child, these are the consequences. The fact that I accepted to come to be a spectator, well, I have to wait until the show is over, and the force of that acceptance is finished. Or so it seems. But if the attitude of the upholder is fully accepted, now remember so far it was a passive acceptance, all right, it's like that, it will go on. But if the attitude of the upholder is fully accepted, an important step forward has been taken towards identification with the active Brahman and his joy of cosmic being. For the Purusha has become the active giver of the sanction. Now, You recognize that not only you are witness, not only you are upholding passively, but your upholding can be active. In other words, depending on whether I am smiling, the performer is enthused. If I am uninterested and not smiling, the performer either loses enthusiasm or changes the performance to try to entertain me, engage me. So in a sense, my attitude, my relationship of upholding does not actively determine what happens, but it influences, it directs. It can even, by withdrawing sanction, bring the whole play to an end. So the performer says, all right, looks like you're all tired, it's late night, let's end with this. Why? Because he senses your position and your state of support is, so to say, withdrawn. The energy you're giving is less intense. And so in this, the poise of the upholder is fully accepted. I do decide, not the content of it, but the way I will support it, and as a result, in a sense, also direct overall the direction of the play. And the point here Sri Aurobindo makes is the identification towards the active Brahman and his joy of cosmic being is the direction in which you are now growing by accepting this role. Now keep in mind, this description may seem very similar to we as our consciousness is already identified in nature. I am already making a choice to think clearly or not think clearly, to withdraw emotions or direct them. No, not really. Your choice is very mixed. Your choice is in a large part a product of nature's instincts working in you. When I say, I don't like the fact that I am getting angry and I want to change that habit of anger, this not liking itself is a part of nature's programming. You are not really free. You are just following the programming itself. The state of upholder is when first you have become free. I am not all these. And then from there you begin to support or direct. So there's a similarity to our involved consciousness, but it's not quite it. Or you can say the involved consciousness is partially upholder, but not truly it. And that's why the first poise of Sakshi, witness, is so important. It creates a first step of separation from which now you can actually begin to exercise the other relationships, which will lead eventually to mastery. But if at any point you find yourself slipping into identification with nature's process, and you have lost the poise of equality, then you are not truly an upholder, or only partially, and you lose the possibility of full mastery of your nature. So this training is extremely important, and that's why that is the first stage. Now let's say upholder consciousness grows. It is really mimicking or mirroring the joy of the cosmic play of the Brahman. And as this grows, we will find ourselves sharing in more and more. As the consciousness widens and relates to the whole cosmos, we will find ourselves sharing with the experience of the active Brahman. Now Sri Aurobindo makes a passing reference to this, because in fact, each of these poises of our individual consciousness corresponds to a poise of the cosmic consciousness. And as our little consciousness grows and widens eventually to the full scope of the cosmic awareness, each of these poises awakes and joins with the state of the divine in relation to his own cosmos and fits each of those facets. So he has made this pointer useful to keep in mind. For the Purusha has become the active giver of sanction. Now as active giver of sanction, you can actually say, let's begin the play. Let's direct it to something more optimistic. Let's explore the more difficult challenges of life. Let's now take rest. And that's the broad direction set. You're still not discussing content. You're not controlling content at any point. That is the movement of nature. So Sri Aurobindo is now showing distinctions between these states. In the attitude of the witness, there is also a kind of sanction, but it is passive. So when we look at the sanction giver, it's not really separate from the witness. They're just two different ways of looking at the same thing. The attitude of the witness also, there is a kind of sanction, but it is passive, inert, and has no kind of absoluteness to it. But if he consents entirely to uphold, the sanction has become active. Even though the soul may do no more than consent to reflect, uphold, and thereby maintain in action all the energies of Prakriti, not determining, not selecting, believing that it is God or force itself or some knowledge will that selects and determines. So just this active upholding. And the soul only a witness and upholder, and therefore giver of the sanction, Anumanta. And so we come to the third stage. So from upholding and the witness, you see how the two join, blur, and lead to the third, where you are not only supporting, not only stepping back, not only supporting, but actually upholding and giving a sanction actively. This, that, more of this, less of that. But not the possessor and the director of the knowledge and the will. So something is still left to nature. Who directs? Who wills? Who has the knowledge of what is happening, what is meant to happen, how the relationships are held in the unfolding of the play? So when, for example, we take this in the context of our emotions or our thoughts, we realize that we can choose what is the state of our thought. I wake up in the morning, I'm feeling sluggish, dull. I shower, I get a little more clear-headed. And then I say, I can't really function for the work I have to do now. So I will myself into clarity. We all do that. What exactly do you do when you will yourself into clarity? Who is willing what? If you observe the process internally, you'll find it something fascinating. You realize the state of your mind is not what it should be. You don't actually conduct the thought itself. You just shift the state. But you realize that you have the power to shift. Who had the power? Who exercised it? The part of you that is not itself the mind substance and the state of the mind, but something separate from it. Some kind of a witness, consciousness separate that says, I don't like this state of confusion in my mind. Let me put myself into clarity. Now sometimes you find you do not have the power to exercise your mind. Your mind is quite dull, so you use an indirect method. I find my mind is dull, let me drink more coffee. What did I do? I didn't have the lordship, the power to change directly, so I used an indirect method, working through the body biology to make the mind more clear and fresh. But still I did it. Instead of doing indirectly, I could do it directly by willing my mind to become conscious, awake, fresh. There's actually no difference between this and this, only the difference of method. In the relationship, you are not only witness, not only supporter, but actually the sanctioner of everything. And in the evening, or once the work is done, it's okay, everything is finished, nothing more left, fine. You relax and your mind dulls down, gets into a half-sleepy state. Now I need to go and rest. And you realize you were holding it up in that state of freshness or alertness because the work needed it. And the moment you withdrew that sanction, you allowed it to fall back into a half-sleepy state, ready to go to sleep. If at that point, let's say you have gone for dinner, and then there's an emergency phone call from your team that says, we have a crisis. Although your mind is dull, although it's already drifting towards sleep, you will it back to clarity. Okay, what do you want to do? And then you let it go back. Now, if this relationship is not fully established from a poise of the first base of witness and equality, there will be consequences. When I make my mind fresh and then I let go, there's a state of tension that remains. I activated and now I can't sleep. If I had caught that moment when I became sleepy, I would have slept very well. But once I've activated it, I'm not able to shut down the activation. I drank too much coffee, it's not in my control. My mind is fresh, I can't sleep even though I want to. Because you're still bound in the Prakriti process, you're not really free. This is the problem of using indirect methods. Where you're using Prakriti to modify Prakriti, you are bound to the system and dependent on it. A magician, or in many practices of various kinds, which use indirect methods to quiet the mind or direct the emotions. Breathe deeply. Unless I breathe deeply, I cannot quiet my mind or calm my emotions. Repeat this mantra. Unless I repeat it, I cannot get to that particular outcome and change which I am seeking. If I do not pick up my magic stick and wave it around 3 times with the specific mantra, I cannot produce that particular outcome. If I have lost my stick, if I have forgotten my mantra, I am helpless. So this point Sri Aurobindo makes in a different discussion, that all methods which use the processes of nature as their means are dependent still on nature, and they bind you further into the working of nature. The true freedom is when your consciousness can separate and exercise from its poise of separateness the will and modify nature at will. Modern science is really a process of indirect mastery of nature. And because it uses methods of nature to control nature, the methods now bind you. You have a washing machine, well, it's going to break down, you're dependent on the machinery to repair the machine. You have air conditioning, it's going to break down, you're dependent on the machinery to repair the machine. You have telephones, mobile phones, they will break down, you are dependent on that. Everything which you thought gave you freedom binds you deeper into the means by which you have the freedom. It's interesting when you think of it this way. The mother draws on a few lines in Savitri where Sri Aurobindo discusses this. And when she was directing Huta to make the painting, the image of the painting was a person dressed in a suit, working businessman, you may say, with chains on his wrists attached to different machinery on which he is dependent. And the idea is, now we are free to do what we want, except that we are bound in greater and greater complexity. The nature of life from what it was 200 years ago to what it is today is essentially this. Then you were dependent on systems. Today you are dependent on systems. But there the dependence was simple. You had your cow who could fall sick, you had your cart which could break down, you had your dependence on whatever the processes, your windmill. Now you have 100 things upon which you're dependent, and the complexity has grown, but the nature of the dependence has not really changed. Yes, you have more time to do things, but that time is itself taken up by maintaining the things which you have to do to have more time. So the discussion came from this, that we need to be able to detach completely and acquire the mastery directly rather than using indirect methods. But let's use the indirect methods to the extent required, helpful as a means towards this. We don't abandon them entirely. So for example, you may drink coffee to bring your mind to clarity, but work on it parallelly. Perhaps reduce now the stimulus required from the coffee, reduce the dosage until you are able to now engage directly with the mind, and you'll find it's not so difficult. Notice how you brew the coffee, the smell fills the room, already you're feeling more energetic. You take the cup in your hand, oh, at last I have my coffee, now I'm feeling good. You've not even taken your sip. It's very, very interesting. You notice you're sick in bed, you're waiting for the doctor comes, and the moment you see the doctor, you have the hope of getting well and you're already half well, at least during that period. The same thing happens here. Somewhere inside you, you have trained yourself now in anticipation of the coffee. Already the shift is beginning to take place. Catch that moment. And then you don't need so much coffee or whatever other means. And bit by bit you'll find you can do this consciously. And that's all that's required. Occasionally, when your biology, because we're still halfway there, we don't have the full separation, your biology is not supportive, you may use external supports, but you'll not be primarily dependent on them, and the true mastery will grow from this. So now what happens is, in this witness, upholder, and we move now to source of the sanction, giver of the sanction, Anumanta. But not the possessor and director of the knowledge and the will. What is that? The possessor and director of the knowledge and will. And he throws in another word from Sanskrit, Jnata Ishvara. Jnata, Jnana, knowledge, the one who knows, Ishvara, the Lord, the enjoyer. The root Ish is lordship and enjoyment. He who is the enjoyer and the Lord, also knower. So knower, Lord, would be the literal translation of Jnata Ishvara. So Anumanta is giver of sanction, but not possessor and director of the knowledge and the will, which is the knower, Lord. But now he's preparing you to shift to this position. But if it habitually selects and rejects it determines. So you started by saying, this is boring, this is interesting, more of this. Habitually, more and more frequently, until at some point you realize you are actually directing the play. Not into the specifics of it, but the direction in which it moves. Fascinating. Now, in fact, there is a lot of exploration in this space. It's happening to us in many ways right now without our knowing it. But I'll first show you how it can be done in a way that you know it. There is software which is wired to your brain waves, pulse, heart rate, blood pressure, skin surface, resistance. Typically the things you may do to measure the internal states of a person as it reflects in the body consciousness. And then all this goes to a computer which effectively, looking at your face further, effectively can recognize what is your state of consciousness, emotionally and mentally. And then it feeds you an image, or a video, or a music. And it monitors you. If it finds you're losing interest, it creates variations until it has caught your interest, and now it builds more on that. And when you get bored of that, again it varies until it catches your interest again, and it gives you more of that. Now imagine a system like this creating for you a play. The moment you feel you're bored and you say, I wish this would change, it changes instantly. And it catches your attention and. Very interesting. Now this is actually happening in other ways. When you're watching a TV series, there is a machinery there to monitor the response of the viewers. What are they interested in? What are they looking for? How can we increase viewership? And the story is modified according to that market research to keep more and more people interested and to draw in more people. This is also happening to you without your knowledge. If you're using computers frequently, you see a news item, this is interesting, you click on it. Back there's a whole artificial intelligence which is monitoring every single thing you watch, profiling your interests and feeding you more and more suggestions of the things which you like. Fascinating. And every time you show more interest in something or less interest in something else, it's profiling you. And this is now tied to advertising revenues, so it gets more complex. There are about 600 different advertising cookies which are tracking you, and they map you in different ways. For example, there will be an article saying, If you have a 2-year-old child, you must read this. If you have diabetes, read this. Are you growing bald? Here's the solution, new breakthrough. And you may click on these inadvertently thinking, yes, that's relevant for me. And this information that you've shown interest in a specific area like this is part of the profiling that's being tracked with those 600 cookies in your computer, going to an advertising network up there which is global, and they are profiled. You have probably a child which is 2 years old, you are balding and you're concerned about it, you probably have diabetes, or depending on whether you didn't click on it, after many attempts they figure out you don't have diabetes, or you're not worried about it, they try you with other things. And they can make such an accurate profile of you, it is scary and astounding. I give an example here of the AI working in this way, profiling, which sent to a 16-year-old child promotional literature for clothes for newborn baby. The father was very upset. He sued the company. How dare you promote to my teenage daughter things which should be sent only to an adult? So, the company had the whole thing computerized, it was happening automatically. They looked at what their software showed, and their software was tracking this child's buying patterns, and based on the buying patterns, it had detected that she was actually pregnant. The father didn't know. And it had sent suggestions automatically. Why? Because she used to buy a particular brand of soap, and she suddenly switched to non-smelling soap. Because during pregnancy, there's an acute sensitivity of smell, and so they shift often to a different kind of brand which does not have strong smells. And it detected that shift, recognized she was pregnant, and had already tracked what are the promotionals to send for the next 2 years as the child would be born. It had detected the stage of pregnancy, and it had planned already all the promotions to follow. Now, this is nature. I give you this example of something which is humanly organized, but this is what nature, life, is doing to you all the time. And at that point, it's not so scary, it's a wonder. At every stage of your life, of your personal development of consciousness, of your evolution, of your aspirations, of your hopes and desires, the wisdom of the divine consciousness supporting this play of the cosmos is watching you, is utterly conscious of you, and is throwing at you the things that you need most for your growth. And if within you there is a strong aspiration that you articulate, I wish I could do something to help in such a situation, in such a circumstance, that is registered, and based on that, opportunities start moving already in your direction. Maybe they take a few years to actualize in the physical circumstances, but the energies start moving. Because the divine wisdom says, yes, surely, we will help you. But if the divine wisdom sees it's not helpful for you, then it will start preventing you from getting into trouble. And if in spite of that you say, yes, but I want it, knowing that it's going to cause me trouble, so the divine wisdom says, all right, here, try it out. And then of course you regret, you say, oh please take it away, I'm done with this, I wish I had listened to the deeper wisdom. But there's a whole complex interplay that's happening with nature. What we see is the most surface part of this mechanical nature, behind which is conscious nature, behind which is the divine energy, superconscious, expressive of what? The divine will, which is what? The originator of your individual awareness, and which reflects in your individual will indirectly in a fragmented way. So you see the big picture. In the higher consciousness, there is one divine being that pours out this movement of nature. And that same divine consciousness puts out a tiny part of itself as each one of our individual centers, entering into nature. From there, from above, the power of that divine consciousness works to support the evolution of this individual being. In a sense, we are born of that divine creative power of the Divine Mother. We are children of the Divine Mother, but then she is nourishing us through these many layers and screens. Nature, now at a lower level of working, not the higher working of the Divine Mother, but the lower, more mechanical nature, is now looking at this child, soul, and the relationship it has is here. This is the child through which I am creating, I am forming. So she forms your body, forms your life energies, forms your mind. And I am helping this child to grow back into his divinity. And through this child formed by me, nourished by me, I will discover my own freedom from this lower mechanical working into which I am stuck. And that's your relationship at the lower level. The soul feels itself almost bound by nature, but in a slow evolution. But nature needs the soul's growth to find her own way of ascending, to discover her own divinity. In that sense, at the lower level, we may say, we are each one of us the hope of the universe. We may be the smallest fragment of tissue and flesh in the largeness of the universe, but for the whole of the universe, this is the material which is most precious, through which it is going to evolve into divinity in matter. At the same time, as we awaken to this realization, we awaken also to the recognition that our own consciousness is a reflection of that. We consciously begin to engage in ascension of our individual consciousness, changing our relationship with nature and engaging with the higher levels of energy, all the way to the higher workings of nature. And so there's a double movement. You grow to awaken and free yourself from this narrow, limited starting point. At the same time, you assist your own nature to grow and become free, to reflect and express the divine nature. And there's a double movement of awakening. And that's the nature of this yoga. The ascetic yogas discard nature completely. And so they do not assist nature's awakening. As far as nature is concerned, she says, oh, this fellow has escaped and abandoned me. Whereas the affirmative, life-embracing and life-transforming nature of the integral yoga says, this too must be raised along with the awakening of the consciousness. And there's a double support in the movement. And in this, you have now come to the poise of the sanctioner and growing more and more into the knowledge lordship by selecting habitually, rejecting what is offered, determining. The relatively passive has become an entirely active sanction, is on the way and is on the way to be an active control. So we're awakening, we discover we can change. I can make my mind conscious. I can direct broadly my thoughts. And I realize somehow I have inherited or developed the habit of pessimism. I don't like it. And I can remold my mind to make it optimistic, more positive. I look at my emotions and I find my energies or emotions tend in a particular pattern. I can will them literally to change. And so far I've only looked at examples of mind and emotions, but the same process extends into the body. To the extent that we are able to make the body conscious, plastic and responsive to the mind's will, we are able also to modify its processes in exactly the same way. So let's look at first the indirect methods. Your body, I realize with age it's becoming a little stiff. I don't like it. It's not good for my health. And I start exercising to stretch, to make the muscles more supple. I modify the food I eat to make the body less dull, more fresh, more clear, and so on. Indirect method. If tomorrow I eat a dulling food, I lose the freshness. I'm dependent on the machinery. But if I become conscious of my body from within, I can literally will it to become more supple, more conscious, or even modify certain habitual reactions. Now, I give an example here of a physical change. We all have many experiences, but something which are quite surprising also. One of the things which happened to me at some stage was that I could not put on weight. I was always low in fat content. The result was I would feel chilly even if there was a fan's breeze. And then I was struggling with all kinds of food, exercise, nothing worked. And I said, this is the wrong way. I should ask the body what it wants, what it believes. So I felt what the body wants. And the body does not talk like the mind. It does not feel like the emotions. It's more like a sensation which just leans towards a preference or a knowledge which is felt in the body's consciousness. And so it felt as if, and it evoked an image, that if I take warm rice and put ghee on it and the ghee melts, that was the feel of the image. That would be the nourishment it needs to put on weight. Okay, so I started doing that every day. I would make sure the rice was warm, put that, and with the mind participate in the body's conviction and imprint it. Over about 6 months, I put on 5 kilos. And then I was traveling and I didn't have ghee. I was in Europe, I didn't have ghee. And I didn't have rice. I was in a completely different diet. And I said, finally, it's not that thing, it is that feel which the body had. So I held the feel and from within just amplified the feel as far as possible of the same sensation. And in that 1 month, I put on another 5 kilos. And the interesting thing was afterwards, I didn't follow any diet, it stayed, the weight stayed. Now this is an example which if you look at it purely from biological processes, it cannot be explained. Or others who simply by willing internally can cure illness, overcome even incurable illnesses. It's really an access in the body consciousness, but feeling what it needs, what it wants, and molding from within. At another point, I realized that I was getting some unhealthy tendencies in the body, fat formation, and it was associated with sugar. But I had a craving for sugar. So I said, I have to get rid of this. Getting into the body consciousness, feeling the craving of the sugar, the part that feels the craving, you put a will on it and reshape it to now dislike the sugar. That's not the best way. Remember, the best way is equality. But as a first step, I created the feeling of, yeah, not good. Disgust for sugar. And so over the next few days, very quickly I found I disliked sugar and automatically I cut down the sugar content, etc. But the dislike remained and it was a reaction in the body which has other effects. So eventually one has to then get free of that. But the point is you can actually get into the body consciousness and shape its behaviors, its likes, its dislikes. Who's doing that? At first it's the mind becoming conscious and entering the body, making it conscious also and putting a will. But there comes a point where you can even begin to experience in the body a part that is like the Purusha of the body consciousness. And if you can get to that, from there you can literally reshape by putting a will. You can reshape the body functions and even the body form. The access to this at first is by the mind identifying with the body and discovering in it the status of body consciousness as Purusha. And it is a slight shift which is simply giving sanction or upholding or giving sanction in a general way. And the result is the body shape itself can be modified. Sri Aurobindo refers to this as one of the things he did as part of his early stages of the yoga. He put a will to change the shape of his body, and the bone structure of his waist itself changed. He said the fat change was easy because it's soft tissue and it is replaced every few months. But the bone structure takes many years because it's the slowest moving, the slowest regenerating part of the body. And that, he said, took 5 to 6 years, but the shape of the waist and the body structure of the waist changed completely and permanently. Now, I'm giving these examples to show you that the principle now operates everywhere. In reshaping your mind, reshaping your emotions, even reshaping the body. And then to the extent that your consciousness now extends into your workspace, you can apply a similar shift in the environment. You can create in your workspace an environment that tilts it, turns the consciousness, the energies in specific directions. And that's part of the culture of a space or a group work or a team consciousness and so on. So we moved from Sakshi, witness, to upholder, Bharta, to sanctioner, Anumanta. And now we are turning towards knowledge, lordship. But if it habitually selects and rejects in what is offered to it, it determines. The relatively passive has become an entirely active sanction and is on the way to an active control. Literally, at each moment, you're controlling and even directing the process of the play. It's only a question of how frequently you're exercising this choice. This it becomes when the soul accepts its complete function as the knower, Lord, and enjoyer of nature. So now he's putting all three things in one go. When you come completely into these three things. Now these triple relationships you will see has three facets. You can be the knower, you can be the Lord, you can be the enjoyer. But they tend to merge into each other. Just as the first three tended to merge into each other, from witness to upholder to sanction giver, we saw kind of a smooth flow. Here also between these three there is an interdependence, but again we can see it through stages. First, as the knower, the soul possesses the knowledge of the force that acts and determines. So you're exercising an intention, you have the knowledge of what that intention is doing, the force put out, and what it is that will come out of it. What will it determine? Which direction is it pushing? Because you're aware, you're the one exercising that will. It sees the values of being, which are realizing themselves in cosmos. It is in the secret of fate. So here is the extent to which this goes. You put an intention, it modifies. Put an intention, it modifies. The values of being which are realizing themselves in cosmos. I put an intention that this whole working should take a more positive direction. This value is now being worked out in my mind, in my emotions, in my environment, or even a larger space. And then it is in the secret of fate. What is fate? The will put out is now leading to a series of chain reactions or responses. I make a decision to reshape my thoughts to give an optimistic turn. I don't choose selectively all the thoughts. I just make this shift and the thoughts now begin to turn. And what will be the outcome of this? Inevitably, I will become an optimistic person. My friends' circle will change. My pessimistic friends will fade out. I will build a new set of optimistic friends. I will draw to me more optimistic energies, and the whole direction of my life, fate, has changed. When you look at fate, and he has put capital F, the way we say something is fated is as if something is out there fixed, which has to happen, whatever you may do. But who made that happen? Who decided it? Who fixed it? Who leads you inexorably to that? And so the way Sri Aurobindo defines this in a different space, I think it is in Savitri, he says, what the soul sees, what the soul chooses, becomes its fate. Fate is nothing but the free will of the self working out in circumstances. So at the level of the self, a choice was made. This is the thing to be realized. Now that choice may be so broad that it may not even be fixed into one life. It may be across several lives for all of us. That choice being made, our life was given a turn towards the Spirit. One way or other, whether you like it or not, you would have been led towards it because something inside made a choice. And the result was, whenever in your life something came which resonated with that choice, you were attracted to it. Things which came which conflicted with that choice, you may have played with for a while, but after a while you lost interest. And so automatically, although your life is wandering, although it is going zigzag, the trend of the zigzag is in the direction of the spirit. So one can say, whether in this life or the next, you will realize the self. Why? Because the self chose this as the direction. But will it be this life or the next or the one after? That depends on how much time you spend in the zigzag or how rapidly you move towards that goal. And there may be a whole complexity of other issues involved. But those also ultimately are broadly set by the choice of the self. The self may say, I would like to have a broad and more complex experience and realization, so it needs to go through more rich and diverse experiences. Or the self may choose, I want to get there quickly, not too much time to lose, and I'm willing to compromise the diversity and complexity that can be worked on later. And the turn is less zigzag, more rapid. If you take an example of a person like Ramana Maharshi, who came with that mission as a Vibhuti, the purpose was set at the very origin before even the movement to birth came. And it came with the force and the power to fulfill that. And you see the tendency in childhood. In childhood, he would go into such deep sleep that you couldn't wake him up. So when his friends found out that he was in such sleep, they tried to wake him through water, hit him, and he wouldn't wake up. So they said, oh, here's an interesting thing. And they were kids, they were trying to do mischief. The mischief bug caught them, whatever we may say. So they would drag him out of his bed, beat him up thoroughly and throw him back in the bed, and he would get out of bed with bruises, not knowing what happened. Now nobody goes into that depth of sleep unless the inner being was already so familiar, or it drew the personality in to such a depth. It's almost as if he came with that, but at a deep level. The surface personality knows nothing about it. But that is tilting the balance. And naturally one day he walks out of the house and says, this is what I wish to do. He goes into the hills, sits down. Nobody to teach him. But he begins the meditation and begins to go deep. Why? Led by the magnetic pull of the self. He goes into this underground room, chamber of the temple, so that he is not disturbed. Rats start biting at his feet when he is in deep meditation. He comes out of the meditation, there are wounds on his feet, bleeding. He's not eating, he's not feeling hungry. Doesn't matter somehow. And of course, as he describes it, he attained to the realization of the self in 3 days. But then, it's not a state he is able to live in all the time. So it took him 10 years to stabilize that experience until he lived in it constantly. And then, what was his purpose in life? To hold that realization and impact the world from that. That was his mission. What do? You don't need to do anything. And so there were circumstances, nature, his mother came, devotees formed, they would bring him food. His mother shifted him to a cave which was more comfortable, less harmful to his body, bit by bit, and he accepted each of these. He could have said no. But since that was the mission, there was a sanction, okay. But there was not an active involvement to draw these things. If at all you may say the self chose, and so those things were drawn to him and circumstances formed around it. But the mission was very specific and it was accomplished in a very relatively short time. He stayed as long as it was necessary. When it was time to leave, that's it. But what did he do when he left? There's a beautiful example which comes from that. When he's about to leave his body, one of the disciples asks him, please don't leave us. And he says, where can the self go? Living in the self. Your body is there, you shed the body, you take it on, you shed it. You are right there, the self is right there. Makes no difference. So where is he? Still there. What is he doing? Still what he was doing. That's it. The set outcome was already there in the first vision of the self as it looked forward. This is what I want to accomplish. Whether across 100 lives, whether across a single life, simple, rapid, not rich and diverse in its scope. But this was the mission, this was done over fate. Free choice of the self, towards which nature must inexorably move because nature is its power. Even if it takes the poise of witness, it is indirectly providing a sanction and a choice. It is indirectly providing this selection and leading things eventually to that outcome. So the point Sri Aurobindo makes is, when the soul accepts its complete function, accepts to be the knower, and it releases the choice, well, there is in that the knowledge of the force that acts and determines. It sees the value of being which are realizing themselves in cosmos. The moment a shift is made, there's a ripple everywhere because everything is interconnected. The moment you make this choice within you, I've decided this, immediately there's a ripple going out. But if you're conscious of this and you're conscious of the fact that you make this choice, you're conscious of what it is that's rippling out. The values of being which are realizing themselves in cosmos. Now everything starts reorienting based on those ripples. It is in the secret of fate. And all this happens when the soul accepts its complete function as the knower, Lord and enjoyer of nature. But first step as knower. It is in the secret of fate. But the force is itself determined by the knowledge, which is its origin and the source, and standardizer of its valuations and effectuations of values. Therefore, in proportion as the soul becomes again the knower, it becomes also the controller of the action. So now the relationship between the knowledge and the action is being explored. The force you're conscious of, oh, it's happening. I chose this and there's a ripple. But Sri Aurobindo goes back to what is directing the force. The force is determined by the knowledge which is its origin and the source. So I may have set, let's say, a broad intention. I want to dedicate my life to, let's say, service to humanity. It may be a choice that the soul makes before birth, or sometimes it wakes up to that choice as the personality has awakened and says, this is what I wish to do. And then the chain of events follows. But you realize the chain of events, the force itself as it works out, what was its origin? In the knowledge. It is that knowledge which is secretly prodding and directing the force. Every time an energy moves, it is because that knowledge inside the energy says, this is where I want to go. And it moves that way. Circumstances change, this is what I want. And it moves that way. So the navigation of the energy is by the inherent knowledge in the force. So the force is itself determined by the knowledge which is its origin, and the source and standardizer of its valuations and effectuations of values. And this is the part which is extremely important to recognize. As the force moves, what determines the values that the source holds? What is the standard of its reference? The knowledge inside says, every time circumstances change, the things which allow me to serve best, that is the value I pursue. In somebody else, the turn of the spirit may be heroism and courage and self-sacrifice for a cause. And every time that arrangements move, this is the standard of reference that determines the movement of the energies in my thoughts, in my feelings, even in my body. In somebody else, the turn of the self may be to worship the divine in beauty. And as a child, as I grow, in every movement of my unfolding personality, the sense of beauty, the sense of harmony, the sense of the sacred, these are the things which are held as the standard of reference. So you read the words again very carefully. The force is itself determined by the knowledge which is its origin and the source and standardizer of its valuations. How do I value this situation? How do I value this friendship? How do I value this job offer? How do I value these different attractions? By the content of that knowledge, this love of beauty, art, the worship of the sacred. And this gives me a lot of money, but I don't get the opportunity to worship the sacred. It's crude and crass. I choose the less paying job, but it gives me that satisfaction which I'm seeking. Or I may momentarily be in my surface personality, be attracted to more money. I feel disgusted and I am now suffocating until I break away. And now I feel happy that I'm doing that thing which gives me satisfaction. You see, the reference of standard of what is valuable and what is not is here. I show you an example which is a real life case. My sister is an artist, so she has all these refined values of art. And somebody came to her and said, "What do you think of this painting?" So she began to give her critique and appreciation of it. And the guy says, no, just tell me, how much can it sell it for? What is its value in the market? And my sister said, I don't know. The values were totally different. Around the same experience, this man had a valuation of transaction, she had a valuation of art and beauty. In any situation of life, each one of us as we approach it, what determines our reference of valuation? This knowledge. So reread the knowledge which is its origin and the source and standardization of its valuations. It is the source of all these valuations. It is also holding the standard, the reference, against which everything is going to be valued. And as a result, the next step after the impact and effectuations of values. Now I value this, I value that differently. So the offer comes, more money, but less satisfaction of art. On the other side, less money, but more satisfaction of the creative joy. The effectuation of the values is the way I will be pulled. What determines that? The drive of the action, the seeking for. And sometimes this person will behave in weird ways. They'll suddenly throw everything away and go to a job in an remote, extreme, uncomfortable, disconnected space because they're attracted to that. If you go back deep into the personality, to the things which motivated them to do those strange things, you'll find this key. I give another real life example. This is a young girl. At the age of 18, she has just completed her last stage of the studies. The exams have been done and they have announced the results. And she says, I don't wish to see the results because I don't believe in this system of education. I'm going to change it. I'm going to work to change it. The next thing she says, all my life I've had privileges. My parents have been supporting me, my friends. I've had the best schools, the best education. What's it like to have nothing? So she looks around on the map of India, isolates a desert space in Rajasthan where the people living in a particular spot have to travel 60 kilometers to get to the nearest school or government facility. What's it like to not have privilege? Go right there. So she leaves everything, enters that space, starts living with those people, wearing their clothes, speaking their dress, eating their food, working with them to travel 60 kilometers every day, to bring water for survival, for the children to walk with them to the school, and then at the school at which she goes, because it's a very rural and patriarchal society, the girls are asked to sit outside while the boys sit inside. And the headmaster of the school is sitting in his room drunk. So she suffers this quietly. She has to cover her head. It's a very, conservative society. So she's sitting with the girls there. And we're from a girl who's come from a city life. Suddenly she's living there for a few days. And then after a while, having experienced it fully, she is convinced that she has lived with them by their standards. Now her standard kicks in. I have to talk to the headmaster. So she goes to the headmaster. I want to speak with you. I'm busy. Wait there. And she waits patiently through the whole day. And at the end of the day, he says, sorry, I have to go now. Meet you tomorrow. She goes again the next day, walks the 60 kilometers, goes to the headmaster, wait there. 20 days she waited at his door. She was a girl, young girl. Who's she to tell him anything? He refused to even interact. And after 20 days, something changed in him. He said, okay, what do you want? And then she started a conversation. The result of that interaction was, this headmaster gave up his alcohol, took responsibility for the school, changed the entire content of the education, brought the women, the girls and boys together, and today he is overseeing 400 such schools. Amazing story. But if you go back to the drive behind it, one young girl, driven by what? It's not even a formed ideal. What's she going for? What is she going to do? Nothing which your mind could have described as her objective. Just entering the space which is least privileged and then being herself. And the result was this ripple effect change. That's it. Amazing. It's a miracle. Done by what? Maybe her intelligence served a purpose. Maybe her life energy served a purpose. Maybe her body served a purpose. Of course, all that was useful. But none of these were the drivers. The prime driver were the power that came through her, and which was coming from the soul's knowledge and strength, working through these things, changing people from inside out. You cannot do this by giving lectures. You cannot do this by passing laws. And the change which is there is so radical, unimaginable. No mechanism would have done it except this. And this is our first glimpse of what we will call truly soul power. Soul power is not morality and ethics as Mahatma Gandhi used to project it. He also spoke of soul power, but it's not this. It was a morality, moral energy, ethical energy, a drive of even a blackmail, an emotional blackmail by which he compelled others to do what he wanted. That's not it. Here there was no blackmail, there was no assertion, no domination. Just being who she was and holding that ideal. It had the effect of exercising, changing. So now we reread this sentence and I can understand it more deeply. But the force is itself determined by the knowledge which is its origin and the source and standardizer of its evaluations and effectuations of values. So the play of force is determined by the knowledge. The knowledge originates the force and is the source of the standardizer of its values. It is also the source of the effectuation of its values. Knowledge is the starting point. Knowledge in awareness, I am. Not what I do, what I am. And that ripples out and changes nature. Therefore, in proportion as the soul becomes again the knower, it becomes also the controller of the actions. It's amazing. It's very pithily, very concisely described, but what it captures is the full relationship of the state of consciousness, knowledge of the soul, rising into knowledge, and how it affects everything. And this is the Jnata Ishvara, the knower lordship. How long will it take? None of that is included in this. It's the direction and effectivity of the force. The circumstances of life may change, the direction and effectivity of the force is set by the status of knowledge. Therefore, in proportion as the soul becomes again the knower, it becomes also the controller of the actions. Now, it's not at any point, it may still effectuate certain actions, but that's not what is making for the result. What it's doing from the knowledge state of consciousness is actually determining the result, irrespective of the actions made. This is why it is fate. What it is inevitable, and therefore he has said also, it is in the secret of fate. Contrast this with a normal person. I do this, I try this, I push, I pull, my knowledge is leading, but what knowledge, surface, mind, likes, dislikes, books read, advice received, or my own some intuition or insight, I chase, pull, push. Maybe something happens. More often, something happens which I did not intend, and I realize, wow, this was so much better than what I could have intended. That's the lower working of the soul in the superficial knowledge, nature, bound, etc. What we are speaking of here is something totally different. It is this poise of knowledge of the soul which determines the outcome without concern with the intermediate processes. They are all led by this. Now imagine, as you grow into this state, it has this effect in you, in your personality, in your nature, in your environment, the people with which you interact, in the space you're responsible for. But also as your consciousness widens, it has an impact further beyond. And it is this which is the true sense of lordship and the basis for the siddhi of Aishwarya. Ishvara, Lord. Aishwarya is the nature of being Lord. And Sri Aurobindo describes this in the Record of Yoga as he is ascending into that status of consciousness spontaneously. There are 3 degrees to it. The first is Ishita, the second Vashita, and the third Aishwarya, where it comes into complete fulfillment. In the first degree, there is an intention put, a desire. That's why Ishita, which comes from the root Ichha, ich, the will, the desire. So you desire that a certain thing should happen, you put an intention, a will, and then it works out. And you can see how the same principle, but now on a lower level of working. Vashita so in the first case, the Ichha, you have a desire, and then there's a ripple effect, it comes. You do not know how. I feel like I would like to eat some grapes, and then there's a chain of events, and suddenly this grape seller is in front of my house, knocks on my door. Or a friend walks in and says, oh, you know what, this morning I was coming to meet you, I felt like buying you these grapes. It happened. But I didn't particularly get into the specifics of it. Vashita is when you put a particular intention and determine the means by which it will happen. Such and such a person should actually do it this way. And Sri Aurobindo gives an example with a bird. As the bird is flying, he intends it to change direction. Or a person is there walking by on the road, there's a mat which is lying down, and he puts a will for the boy to go and roll up the mat and place it in a particular corner. Very specific. So at first the boy looks at the mat, stops, hesitates, then moves on. And again Sri Aurobindo puts a second push of the will. This time the boy gets over his inertia, rolls up the mat, puts it there, walks on. And Sri Aurobindo makes minute notes of how this is the response of a tamasic nature to the push of the force. But the Aishwarya, this is the fascinating one, where a general intention is put out and it works itself out through existing circumstances, using all possible means that are under its influence. And often the result is miraculous because it acts from many different directions simultaneously and pulls up a result. But in the very nature of the Aishwarya, there is a broad, embracing character of not only the knowledge, but also of the action. And that is the nature of this lordship. And the practical result in Sri Aurobindo's life was, although at an early stage he had made it a decision never to ask anybody for anything, as he came into Aishwarya, he didn't need even to ask anything. Whatever he needed happened, it was done, circumstances arranged themselves, and so on, in his immediate circumstance. But also that he could exercise it broadly on other world situations. And he observed that there was never a situation where his will failed, wherever he put an intention on the circumstances of the world. But it could be done in many of these ways. It could be done in a broad power put, and it works out. It could be done with a specific intention, it works out with that specific way. or it could be done as an impulse for a particular outcome, narrowly, but not in this broad outcome. So, all of these, from this status of consciousness, we have to see. Contrast this with what I will describe as low-level magic, where somebody in Wicca, witchcraft, they'll say, do this ritual, use this mantra, concentrate on this, ask for this wish to be fulfilled, and it will happen. That's the soul bound in nature, using process of nature, maybe an occult process, occult meaning hidden. You do not see how it works, but you get the result. It is not lordship. It is not from a poise of freedom. It is from a poise of being further bound in the machinery. So I had met somebody long ago who claimed that he had actually got the power to materialize things by such process, occult process. And he explained to me that it involved getting into relationship with some low-level spirit. And the spirit made a pact with you. You had to give it something in return for its services. And at the end of it, he could do this, and he would have the object materialized by the spirit, of course. And then he said to me, you know what? It's no different from having a servant in your house to whom you give money and say, bring me that soap from the market. What's the difference? You pay your due, the fellow goes and brings it from the market. Except this creature is invisible to other human beings. You have to pay it its debt, and then it gives you what it wants. But more often than not, it then begins to dominate and interfere in your life. And he briefly mentioned this. It would demand that he do something, not do something, and so on, until it became insufferable. There are many such stories available in the occult literature. But wouldn't you rather just keep a servant that you can fire if you decided he doesn't do what you want? It's much simpler. But it's no different. You have not changed. You have become more dependent now on these methods. This is what you see as low-level magic. To a person who does not understand this distinction, they will say, so-and-so, with his spiritual power, so to say, he is able to get results. No, that's not what it is. It is an occult, low-level process of nature. That's all. What we are discussing here is something fundamentally different. It comes from a poise of consciousness, which, from the status of this true knowledge, influences the outcome from a poise of freedom and remains ever free even as it acts. It's never bound even to its action or to the consequence of its action. And so with it comes the second facet. Nor can it do this without becoming the active enjoyer, bhakta. And then he explains the nature of the lower enjoyment and the higher enjoyment. But the character of the higher enjoyment is whatever it engages with, it is enjoying, but from a poise of freedom, which is detached and yet equal and free. In contrast, the normal action we have of enjoyment is bound in the duality. This is pleasurable, this is painful, and you cannot escape from this. But from that poise, you have the equal enjoyment and the true character of the delight. So maybe just quickly to read this, but we'll explore it in detail next time. In the lower being, the enjoyment is of a twofold kind, positive and negative, which in the electricity of sensation translates itself into joy and suffering. But in the higher, it is an actively equal enjoyment of the divine delight in self-manifestation. The nature of the delight is, I am manifesting myself. The movement of delight is the manifestation of self. Not doing something, but fulfilling yourself. There is no loss of freedom, no descent into an ignorant attachment. The man free in his soul is aware that the divine is the lord of the action of nature, that Maya is his knowledge will determining and effecting all, that force is the will side of this double divine power, in which knowledge is always present and effectual. And he is also aware of himself as a part and portion of the divine, as a center of action in the world. which he discusses later. So all this we will take up next Friday. And for now we can just review what we have read and the stages of this awakening into mastery. And we can pause here for any comments or questions. Mm-hmm.
So this means that you know what to do and you know it for certain.
And you know?
You know for certain
Yes.
the right thing to do.
Yes.
You just know.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yes, you can say that you know what to do, but more than that it is, you know what you are and what you wish to become, to manifest. Now, it may not take a specific form. Like in the movement of Aishwarya, there's a large movement which you may not give to it specifics of details. Take the example of Auroville. The mother put this power. Auroville, the city that the earth needs, prototype, model township for world unity and its practical realization. Now, at this level, she puts the Aishwarya. The details of who comes, how they come, what path of development the process takes, what difficulties it has to go through and how it works around them or solves them, all of those are part of the complexity of circumstance that is not needed to be got into from this position. Of course, one could put a very specific narrow will and it would be bound to a narrow set of circumstances. But it is not useful for the long run. Whereas this has the knowledge what I am and become. And that's it. The details are not known in the mental way. The knowledge is of the great nature of consciousness and its broad intention. Yes. Yes, everything works together. And it has a lasting result because it is not bound to specific circumstances. Anywhere you give specific instructions, eventually they will become outdated. So if in the good old days you go back 100 years, the specific instructions could be that you must daily communicate by telegram wherever you are in the world. And you can see how that would become obsolete very quickly. You would have to reinterpret it into telephone and then internet or whatever, or telepathy eventually. But if you put a general principle, you should always be in connection in your shared ideals. Now you don't care how that is worked out, whether you do it by letter or by inner contact or whatever, it's irrelevant. So it is on this level that the thing is held and known. And in the completeness of the supramental consciousness, it can actually see and know all possibilities through which the situation will pass through. But it doesn't need to get into specifics of them. It can just hold this general base. In that sense, when that kind of a broad intention is put, the energy finds the instruments. And to the extent the instruments are ready, it empowers the instruments and works through them. To the extent that they are empowered and now effective, it works out specifics of action wherever possible. But none of these need to be known at the level of the initiation. That's why the mother could say, the result is certain, it is not dependent on people. When she makes a statement like that, you wonder, but you still need people to do it, right? No. The people will be found, and if you refuse to participate, somebody else will be found who will work and eventually will be used as the instrument to do it. But if you accept to participate, and if you make yourself a conscious and willing and effective instrument, then of course all this will happen much faster. But it doesn't depend on you. That's the point. That's the nature of the initiation itself, of the fate. So it is destined, it is fated, it is inevitable, whatever happens. But the specifics of the working out, yes. Our participation or non-participation will make a difference. That it will happen sooner and with less difficulty, or later and with more difficulty.
Thank you very much for
liberation. And when the vision was made to serve the community and set up a chapter called She, because I really wanted to be Mother's outpost, if you like, in Croatia, everything came together to make it happen. The investor, the building, the project, so many people wanted to volunteer, from the lawyer to architects to, and I was just the instrument to hold the space and everything came together. But then in the process, when it got manifested, and the operation, of course, like normal challenges came, and so the resistance of nature, resistance of the community, because it's so advanced for this very conservative Catholic it is this kind of, indeed, what is very difficult to hold it always. Because what I realized, I was in the image of manifestation. Everything was coming together. But when the challenges came, that the nature started to mix, to have the boys and not to feel so
You get shaken from the center if that base is not strong enough. And that goes back to our earlier part of the discussion, why the base of equality and the witness poise has to be first stabilized, upon which these things can then be built and be made perfect. So remember the earlier discussion, the equal and impersonal delight as of a spectator at a show, and when it is completely unattached and free from affection by the phenomena. That's where the base of the Sakshi, the witness, is to be established. And then upon that, these other movements have to be built. That naturally happens when we are more centered in the self. The challenge for us is this: of course, we can't wait to be first established in self before the work initiates. The challenge for us is that as the work is initiated and we engage in the work, we are able to disengage frequently to deepen our base, deepen the foundation, and now act from a still deeper level. And when again we hit a barrier, we step back, deepen the foundation, and act from a deeper base. And in a sense, we grow as the work grows. And that's the best way in which it can be done. Yes. In the absence of our own development, which is always falling short, to recognize and remain in awareness of the deeper divine presence, which already has that equality, that base, that strength and knowledge. To recognize that it is there and to lean on it and ask for its help, for its support, but for which you have still to be able to disengage and align in some part of your being to its equality and its clarity, so that it can reflect in you and guide you. You become less a doer, more an instrument through which it is done, etc. And so it's a sadhana individually, even as it is a collective sadhana and growth for the community. But we need that to happen more and more in the world. Auroville is the prototype which must inspire many such efforts. And however small, as long as they are rooted in the spirit, eventually they will stabilize whatever the difficulties. Yes. So we'll continue this next Friday.